From the colleges and universities of the nation, CBS Television brings you The Search to know and understand man and his work, the search for a richer, happier life for all.
This is Walter Cronkite. We're about to see a test run of an experimental car, one phase of a broad investigation into auto safety being conducted by Cornell University. Research scientists are trying to find new ways of protecting you when you're involved in an automobile accident, exploring new approaches to this very serious problem. In the next half hour, we're going to take you to the scenes of this research at many points around the country. Now, these people in this car are dummies. They can't be hurt. But what about you? What about the American motorist? What's he doing to himself every day of the week? This is the American road. This is where 35,000 of you have a rendezvous with death every year. On an average day, on a day like this one, close to 3,000 of you are going to maim or kill yourselves or each other, a rate of 1 million casualties a year from auto accidents of all types. Yet you're driving the best and safest cars made anywhere in the world today. Excellent brakes, precision steering, the finest mechanical controls, and driving on better designed, safer highways. But it's still you behind that wheel. As long as the human factor comes into play, accidents will continue to happen, lots of them.
We're at the scene of a pretty bad smash-up here on U.S. Highway number 1 near Laurel, Maryland. The 3 people in that car were seriously hurt and have just been removed by ambulance. Those 2 men going over to the wreck are Mr. John O. Moore, principal investigator of auto crash injury research at Cornell University's Medical College, and Lieutenant Punky of the Maryland State Police. Information accident and thousands like it gathered from several states cooperating with Cornell University's crash injury research is analyzed at the university's medical college in New York.
What would you estimate back? I would say the man was doing between 45 and 50 miles an hour at the time the accident actually occurred. Steering wheel, the way that's been bent up and pushed out there, and you can also see the windshield where that occupant on the front seat had pushed that out. Now, there were 3 people in this car, and the driver stayed in the car, but now the other 2 people hit the windshield, and then apparently they went out of the right-hand door.
Oh, the right-hand door came open, too.
Yeah, this door here is caught there a little bit, but let's see.
The purpose of this research is to use the highways as living laboratories to find out specifically the causes of injuries and auto accidents. According to John Moore, this gathering of factual information will serve as a basis for automotive engineers to use in their efforts to design safer cars, as well as a guide for experiments in other phases of Cornell's research activities. 3 people were critically injured in this crash, but there are also accidents of another sort being studied by Cornell's crash injury research.
This is the smokestack of an industrial plant in Staten Island, New York. A steeplejack working near the top fell 150 feet, the equivalent of 15 stories, and sustained only minor injury. This is the man, Mr. Louis Cito of Island, New Jersey. How does it feel to fall from that height?
Well, I realized that there's nothing I could have done at the time. There was nothing to grab for or hold on to, so I figured my time was about up. So I closed my eyes. I didn't want to see the ground come up, and relaxed my body. And as I came down, 2 boards fell in front of me, and they sheared the high-tension wires in the path of my fall. Then I woke on the ground.
You feel that living through an experience like that was a miracle, or how would you describe it?
Well, I think it was just plain luck.
Well, thank you, Mr. Zito. We have with us here Mr. Hugh DeHaven, Director of Crash Injury Research at Cornell University Medical College. You've investigated many accidents like this, Mr. DeHaven. Can you tell us why?
Why, yes, because in free-fall accidents of this type, it's possible to estimate the impact speed of the falling body when it hits the ground or hits an automobile or whatever it lands on. In this case, Mr. Zito, who had fallen from the stack here, fell a distance of almost 150 feet and achieved a speed of approximately 60 miles an hour, 62 miles an hour when he hit the ground.
To what do you attribute the fact that Mr. Zito came out of this fall alive?
Well, he hit in structure which was not solid concrete, luckily, and the rubble where he hit acted as an energy-absorbing agent. Anything that would yield under this force would produce a distribution of force, and as the force was well distributed on his body, there was no localized force which caused any injury.
If the human body can survive tremendous forces in accidents like this, why not in automobile accidents? For the answer, back to Walter Cronkite.
We're inside the Cornell Aeronautical Laboratory in Buffalo, New York, where we're going to see some very interesting experiments being carried on in the study of head injuries. We have with us here Dr. C.C. Furness, the director of the laboratory. Dr. Furness, I'm wondering how you got into the study of head injuries here.
Well, Mr. Cronkite, I suppose it does seem a little strange. As you know, this is an aeronautical laboratory. As a matter of fact, you can hear the wind tunnel running in the background there now. And we primarily deal with things that have wings on them and fly. But as time went on, we quite naturally became interested in the people that ride an aircraft, both the pilots and the passengers. And inevitably, we got interested in the matter of their injury. Crashes do occur. Unfortunately, they do occur once in a while. And so consequently, we've taken the findings that we had in this aircraft injury work and have translated them quite directly to the problem of the crashes in automobiles.
Well, maybe you can tell us what that rather odd-looking object over there is that caught my eye a moment ago.
Well, I suppose it hardly looks like it to you, but actually that's a model of a human head.
Mr. Dye? I'm Walter Cronkite.
How do you do?
Dr. Furness tells me that you're the man who can explain these strange goings-on.
Well, I'll try to.
Good.
We're very happy to. This is a plastic head form.
Looks like a sort of an artificial skull.
Yes, it reacts about the same way as your head and mine when it strikes something. We have found in other research that about 3 out of 4 fatalities come through injury to the head. Now here we are attempting to determine the magnitude of the force that strikes the head when the head is thrown against it to determine the fatal limits. Obviously we can't use the human head, so we use the plastic head forms. For example, we've just dropped a 10-pound head 26 inches onto this instrument panel knob. Such a dent as this would be made in the head if you were traveling only 11 miles an hour.
11 miles an hour?
That's
You mean at 11 miles an hour, if my head hit the dashboard and a knob like that, it could cause a hole like that in my head?
That could happen.
Ooh.
The shape of the object makes a lot of difference as far as its lethal factor is concerned.
The difference as to whether you hit the flat surface of the instrument panel or one of the instrument knobs or a key or something like
Much
that.
more dangerous on the key. Come over here. There's someone I want you to meet. Mr. Thin Man, Mr. Cronkite. Mr. Cronkite, Mr. Thin Man.
Well, how do you do, Mr. Thin Man? He's quite a handsome fellow. What do you actually prove with this fellow?
Well, as you see, he is made of sheet metal with the joints in the proper position to represent the dimensions of the human. They move and can be torqued up to represent muscular restraint. In other words, he acts the same as a human in a crash. Let's step back a minute and let the engineers make another drop test with the Thin Man. This drop will be from the seated position. The energy which the head hits is measured by that gauge. For example, we've been able to prove that if the weight of the body is kept below the line of the shoulders, that we can reduce the energy of the blow to the head by about 80%. Let me explain. If the weight of the body is high compared to the head and almost behind the head, during the blow, a great amount of energy will be contributed to the blow on the head. However, if the weight of the body is low in comparison to the head, then there will be a smaller energy contribution to the blow. You know, we often do the wrong thing in an accident. We throw our arms up. This raises the weight of the body and contributes a greater mass contribution to energy of the blow to the head. Best thing to do is to avoid the blow entirely by leaning forward and pressing the head, patted with the forearm, against the thing that the head might strike, thus reducing the force entirely.
Wouldn't it be better to keep the head from hitting in the first place?
That is, of course, is the correct solution. Here it is. One way of preventing injury to the head is by use of ordinary seat belts, securely anchored to the frame of the car. These belts prevent the major portion of the body from moving with the head to cause serious injury. This is particularly true of children.
Riding over there in the seat by the driver.
Yes.
These are exactly the same as the belts in an ordinary airplane, aren't they, airliners?
Yes, they are.
Same thing exactly. What's this business on the steering wheel, Mr. Dye?
That is a device called a chest pad, or guard. It prevents serious injury to the chest of the driver from impact on the steering post. Thus.
We're ready to run tests.
Okay, we'll be right out. We better get a coach for this.
Good. Who pays for this experimentation, Mr. Dye?
This part of our research program is sponsored by Liberty Mutual Insurance Company.
How can you tell us just how this experiment is going to work?
We will take this car and run it under its own power down a 200-foot runway and suddenly bring it to a stop by jerking it at the end of this 200-foot cable.
And then what happens, I suppose, to our dummies here? That's what you measure.
These dummies are designed so that they represent fairly closely the human body. They're proportionally weighted and articulated so that they will move with the same motion as the human. We have a 6-year-old in the back seat and a full-grown adult here in the front seat. You notice that we have the heads chalked so that it will show where the head will hit on the roof and panel.
Well, you know that way where this body hits, Mr. Dye, but how do you know how hard it hits?
We'll have to show you on the other side. That's the purpose of this grid and this scale. Through the grid, we take slow motion pictures at the scene of the crash of the motion of the dummy inside the car.
And then you analyze that film, is that it?
Frame by frame, so that we can determine the exact position of the human, or the dummy, for each split second of his motion.
Now, let me see if I've got this straight, Mr. Dye. You know the exact speed of the car and the exact speed of its stopping at the other end of the crash. So then, by knowing the exact speed of your film and analyzing frame by frame, you can tell exactly where the dummy is at every split during that whole period of the crash.
That's correct. Let's make a test run so that you can see for yourself.
Fine, fine. So we're about to see this car in a test crash. It's going to roar down this runway at 30 miles an hour under its own power, guided by remote control, then brought to a sudden, absolute stop at the other end at the snubbing platform. We've got our slow motion cameras down there at the snubbing platform, and you're going to be able to see for the first time what happens to people in a car like this when this powerful force meets an immovable object. Now, the same crash in slow motion. Watch the little fellow in the rear.
Well, we can see what has taken place. The mark on the roof indicated a contact there. And then the stroke moved over onto the windshield, then down onto the panel.
Yes, it looks like you actually made a dent in the panel there.
Yeah, you can see quite a dent right here.
Would you say, Mr. Dyer, that the impact of that might be fatal?
I think that's quite a lethal blow.
Looked like he hit pretty hard.
Concussion.
Fractured skull, something like that.
Concussion or fracture on the roof, and perhaps one on the windshield.
What about our little fellow here? How did he come out?
He's folded up here in the back. He probably took a flight onto the roof, then down onto the top of the seat. See the mark here? And then down on the floor.
He's doubled up completely. In fact, there's even a blue mark there on his shoe. He folded up like an accordion almost, didn't he?
Yes, they find him in weird positions after a crash.
Well, you think he might have survived?
I doubt it. He looks pretty bad.
Mr. Dye, now I wonder if we could get a look at what would happen to these dummies of ours, the little fellow and the big one there, if we had these safety belts you were talking about.
The men are readying the car for another trial crash.
So now we're going to see our car in another test run at the same speed, the same deceleration. We have our slow motion camera set up over here, and we're going to be able to compare with the pictures it takes what happens to these dummies this time when they're strapped in as opposed to the last test when they were not strapped in. Here's the same crash in slow motion with the dummies strapped in this time. Again, watch that little fellow in the back seat.
The little fella had hardly moved at all. Big fella did hit his head on the windshield, but with a much softer blow.
Would you say then that the lesson is rather obvious, that we ought to have safety belts in automobiles?
By all means. I certainly do. They must be anchored to the frame of the car.
Just wrapping them around the seat, any old belt won't do then.
That won't work.
We've seen some very interesting things here, Mr. Dye, but I think our television audience out there would really like to know how all of this that you're doing here is going to help protect them when they go out on that Sunday drive with the family.
That, of course, is our main objective. We are now in the experimental stage of testing materials and ways of protecting you when you go out on your drive. Now, that particular material is an example of energy-absorbing material. I have here an ordinary fresh hen egg. You've scrambled them many times before. In case you've forgotten, drop it on the pavement and see what happens.
Okay, it's your egg.
Now watch this. This will give you an idea as to what can be done with energy-absorbing materials. The energy of the blow is absorbed by the material, leaving very little energy left to break the egg.
Mr. Dye, I see what that can mean to an egg, all right, but what does it mean to us human beings?
We are developing similar materials to protect the human head. In a short period of time, I think you will find great changes in the interior of automobiles using new types of padding materials. After all, if you can save the egg, you can save the human head.
This is Charles Romine. We're standing in an open field in Wharton, New Jersey. And here with us is Mr. Bob Tracy of the Cornell Crash Injury Research. Bob, could you tell us why we're here and what we're going to see?
We're here to see some of the methods that stunt drivers use to protect themselves.
I see. And far down at the end of the field, there is a stunt driver. What's he going to do for us?
He's going to do a complete rollover, and I think he's ready to start now.
You Jake Plumstead?
Yes, sir.
Hi, Jake. That was a spectacular crash. Tell me, you shaken up? How do you feel?
Oh, a little rough.
Well, I can imagine that. How about that fire? Does that often happen?
Not too often, no.
Well, that's good. You didn't spend any time getting out of there, did you?
Sure didn't.
Once that fire happens, out you go.
Out you go is right.
I noticed some safety factors built into the car. What are they?
Safety helmet and a crash belt on the inside.
Well, this helmet here, huh?
That's this.
Yeah.
And the belt here.
That keeps you from jumping around, and you must have jumped around a little in there.
No, this holds you fairly tight.
I see. One thing I noticed was that your doors were wired. For what purpose was that?
Well, your doors are the main support of your automobile. If the doors come open, the roof will come down on your head.
In other words, the roof will crumple if those doors swing open, huh?
That's right. They're sure uncomfortable when you wear one.
I can imagine that.
Well, I have to get ready for another crash, so excuse me.
Well, good luck, boy.
Thank you.
See you. Looking at this car, let's take a look at the front. You know, for all that car went through, it still looks to be in not too bad shape.
Well, yes, the top structures stood up pretty well, didn't they, in that rollover?
Yeah.
It's very interesting for us to note that stunt drivers, through experience, trial, and error, have come up with some of the same answers that we have found in Cornell through using the scientific method. The fact that the doors were secured, they didn't pop open during the rollover, not only supported the top better, but prevented any occupants of the car from falling out during the rollover, perhaps being crushed as it rolled. And furthermore, of course, the safety belt prevented the driver from being thrown violently, perhaps against the top. It's sort of a rough and ready method that he uses, but it's been mighty effective, as we've just seen.
Oh, what is Jake going to do now?
He's going to do what he calls the T-bone, which will simulate a head-on impact at medium speed.
You've seen here a dramatic illustration of the findings of Cornell University's transportation safety research. A serious accident need not result in serious injury. Now to the campus of Cornell University at Ithaca, New York.
This is Dr. T.P. Wright, chairman of the Cornell Committee for Transportation Safety Research.
You have seen our Cornell men of science in the process of exploring new concepts, of opening new frontiers in the field of automobile safety. But here is where our work is really going to count, out on the highway. Our work is not yet complete. As it proceeds, however, we are constantly keeping the automotive industry informed of our progress and of our findings. Our committee will continue its close association with the industry in our common goal of making the safer car of tomorrow a reality. Meanwhile, the search goes on.